Hello, this is Will the Werewolf, and this is Werewolf the podcast. There are loads of, I think they're called links down in the description. That's the righty bit that describes the podcasty thing down there. If you go down to that, you can join groups on Facebook and Instagram and Twitter, and is it called Twitter or is it called X now? Whatever it's called. There's lots of social media stuff down there. There's also a load of books down there if you want to read some really good werewolf writers in particular. There's also, I don't know, there's like nice things to do, like buy a subscription to the show, which is like $2 a month or something, and then you just pay us for making really good content because we think it is. So there. Anyway, we're getting back to the Viking werewolf. We're on episode, 129, and there's no sponsors this week because plop to drop doesn't work when you've got diarrhea. Thanks for listening. Bye. Troll hunting. I watched the thing lift a birch tree from the ground. It was a little like observing the monster sort of do it in slow motion as birds raced for the sky from the treetop. Root ball and all came up as it strained in the wrench to remove it from the ground, twisting and turning the great birch tree. This gave Leif Lauter the time required to run in behind the giant creature and sink a single-handed sword into the calf of its left leg. It was one of the bravest things I've ever seen. If the monster had noticed him, he would have been dead before he knew it. The horrid humanoid giant grunted as the man struck deep, using every ounce of his strength to drive into the muscle of that huge leg. Leif stood for a moment, ripping back and forth, tearing, hoping to cut the Achilles tendon at the heel of the monster, and in doing so, make it a little less of a threat. Agonast-style, the troll screamed into the sky at the outrage of the injury that had been committed on him. Leif eventually wrenched the blade free and cheered in his success as the super sharp sword tore its way through the muscle tissue. The muscle tissue just easily separated before the honed edge of the blade before the sword was pulled from the wound, with a fountain of blood following its path, a red crescent holding for a moment in the air. The giant seemed as if it moved in slow motion. That was how it looked, but it wasn't the case. The thing quickly moved in reality. Agonast-style was a surprisingly agile and so fast for such a gigantic beast. One huge six-fingered moss-coated hand left the tree and swiped around in an unstoppable arc as Leif, with his back to the troll, not paying attention, called on his brothers to attack with his success. He was young. This was foolish. This was a lack of experience. This was a mistake. He would have no chance of any further life experience on this place, on this plane. This was not the time to learn. This was a place to die. I yelled at him. He smiled, thinking I was cheering him on, and then his face changed as he realized that I was pleading with him. I was pleading with him to take his guard. The troll turned in what seemed a ponderance of time as it reached for the man who had hurt it. It roared its disgust and anger, the anger at the injury. The damage was significant, but it seemed that the wound had not even registered fully in the troll's mind yet as it stepped towards Leif. The picture I see now in my head is Leif facing me, his hand to his mouth, yelling and inviting us forward. A young, excited warrior. Behind him, the lumbering behemoth, then an unseen arm stretched towards him from the beast. I screamed at him, "Behind! Behind!" I don't think the man understood, as he thought I was celebrating with him in his wounding of the giant. At the last moment, I saw Leif's face change as he realised we were shouting and pointing at the thing behind him. His face fell as his excitement slipped from his features, and he grounded his feet as he spun, a moment too late, to meet the oncoming arm and grasp. The hand he faced now was larger than the man himself as it poured towards him. He raised his sword above his head and leapt forward to strike. The gigantic hand intercepted the leap and closed around him as he jumped. The warrior simply disappeared, screaming and bellowing a war cry into the gigantic fist. A war cry which resonated until it was cut off suddenly as the vast hand squeezed and the remnants of the now dead warrior erupted from between those tree trunk-like fingers. I turned my head away briefly at the death of the boy as I felt a pang of loss for a moment. That was not it. He was so brave. He would sit with the old father tonight, greatly benefiting the Blind King's armies. Sacrifices. The day before, it was the time of sacrifice for the gods at the Temple of Uppsala. I'd already spoken with the priest about my plan of showing all the pilgrims the monster that I was. I would change my skin before all as I sacrificed my slaves before them. This would be the end of the rumours that were abound about me and bring the reality of what I was to all my people. The stories would run wild about this day through the north and beyond. All creatures, except man, were sacrificed at points around the temple. With each sacrifice, a musical litany of thanks and thoughts was given to the gods. My goats and my horses were given to Freyja for the fertility that I required. I gave my mightiest horse to Thor, a steed for those journeys maybe when his goats were too weary. The sacrifice of slaves is rare, to be honest. They are the greatest gift to the gods, but those slaves must be willing to serve them. One young woman wanted to serve at the table in the great hall in Valhalla. She was beautiful and a particular favourite of mine, with long, fine blonde hair and milk-like skin. She would be a worthy gift for Odin's table. Kendra was a beauty and worthy to stand at the left hand of the great god himself. The crowd surrounded the blood tables where I stood with the priests ready for my work. There was excitement and a thirst to see the blood flow. The wooden tables are convex like a large elongated bowl. The blood runs from the consecrated wounds of the sacrifice to a drain hole that takes it to a large bowl, an iron bowl, which sits below. The bowl was slightly warmed by a fire to try and keep the blood from congealing quickly. The two priests with me were completely shaved clean and stood on either side, covered in white ash from the fires that had warmed the last 3 nights. The charcoal that had been left from the burns was used to blacken the eye sockets, lips and nose, making them look somewhat skull-like from a distance. Their eyes, these priests' eyes, are always bloodshot and rheumy, and they stared at the crowd. No man had any idea what the priests saw. They were always on the mushroom preparation, that they seemed to live on it actually, and it seemed to maintain their ability to see and communicate across the plains. Every eye the priest's glance met could not hold that stare. Those eyes were pain and darkness that no one wanted to share. Kendra came forward. She'd been washed in mare's milk and wore a pure white shift that clung to her still, damp body. She shivered in the cool evening air. Her lips had been reddened by the cochineal we had got from the foreign lands. She was led forward like a bride to matrimony by my wife. I could see that Kendra was struggling on her feet to walk. She was still heavily under the influence of the drink she'd been given the night before. She'd also been taken by many of the young warriors. She'd been seed-laden by them. Each one added his strength to the gift we gave to Odin. My wife Sif passed Kendra's hand to a priest who went forward to receive her and help her climb the steps to stand on the table. She stood there, open and proud, presenting herself to the crowd, hands raised to the grey clouds above her. She had tears of pride in her eyes. She was excited for her onward journey. The crowd cheered and thanked her for, the gift of herself. As a slave, this was the highest honour that she could ever be given. She was going to the Hall of Heroes. A tear of my own pride in Kendra came to the corner of my eye, my young Saxon beauty. The cheering and thanks continued for a while, but eventually the crowd went quiet as both priests walked to either side of the table and took a hand each of hers to help her lay on the wooden deck of what was a shallow longship. She settled. I walked to the head of the table and looked down from above at the beautiful blue eyes that stared back at mine. Her breathing was deep and high-paced. Those perfect young breasts rose and fell beneath that wet cloth clinging to them. It was so exciting for me on so many levels. I now had to help her on her journey. The beautiful face was initially passive. Those eyes that could already see her journey now returned to this world and held mine. Her perfect marble-like face then cracked with a smile. It was a genuine smile. A smile of thanks at this opportunity. I smiled back and mouthed my thanks for her offering. Her hand raised up to mine and I held it and brought it to my mouth. I gently kissed its back, then its palm, before kissing the tip of each finger, and then returning that porcelain hand to her breast. "Are you ready?" I whispered only for her before stroking her hair to offer security and calm. She nodded, closed her eyes, shuffled a little, and settled further onto the planks. I stepped away from her. I was naked or sky-clad. My lashed and purified sweaty body was covered as the priests in the white ashes of the day's fires. The fires had purified, cleansed, and the ash was there and prepared me to be as pure as possible for this act. 1,000 eyes watched me take a forearm-sized blade from an offered hand. I held the blade as a priest rinsed it in ale from hilt to tip. The fluid ran. It dripped from the blade's tip as I shook the remaining liquid from the weapon. I presented the knife to the crowd before drawing the tip of it down my forearm, drawing my own blood as an offering, not to the gods in this case, but to her, to Kendra, to prove the blade was worthy of her. This was the agreed point at which I would do the reveal. I turned to the crowd and placed the now sanctified blade on the wooden surface just above the woman's head and paused. Leaning over her, I just paused for dramatic effect. The crowd became restless. Feet were shuffling and whispers were heard. I leant forward still, leaning my weight on my hands at the top of the table as though in pain. My head was bowed as though praying over the victim. I was building that dramatic sense. I was building it all in the moment. I was making the tension for the grandest of reveals. I waited to drag time out to and beyond that awkward point. Just a little too long. The crowd was now wondering and waiting. Then I rose. I stood up straight and raised my hands to the sky as I roared a human cry that progressively broke into the wolfen howl as Fenrir tore into me, joining me to form the werewolf. This was no painful change for me. My transformation was exhilarating. My body was not racked with breaking bones and expanding limbs. None of that for me. I simply broke into a vast black smoke-like cloud and reformed into the werewolf. As the werewolf, we're 8 feet tall from claw-tipped toe to fur-laden head, and that fine pelt, is black. No, not black. It's another thing. It's the antithesis of colour. It sucks light from the world. We can only get close to hinting at it being a matte black colour, but all anyone can see is a black shadow in the world. Below that pelt is a finely muscled body, a warrior build, strong, powerful, and made for war and murder. A body that is a weapon in itself, a creature perfect for violence. My jaws are laden with teeth, and the howl that I erupt with exposes the carnassials, canines, and incisors to the crowd of onlookers. Some look on in awe, and some show fear. Some cannot look at all. All are worthy responses to my change. My arms are long and well past my knees when I stand. Claw-tipped hands stretch wide as I raise those arms to the sky once more. I am a monster, a true monster. I settle, relaxing, breathing hard. I feel alive. The sensation is like no other. I feel them all look and all shirl at my magnificence. Silence falls on the crowd. I've not even opened my eyes yet, and this is on purpose. These eyes are the last thing many have seen on this plane. They are openings of fire that light a path from our world to another. I now dramatically raise my eyelids and stare over the crowd. Gasps of shock escape lips. Everyone now is focused on me. The shock takes all as the flames of amber fire lap the orbits of my eyes. One of the priests falls to his knees and quails before me. So perfect. This was perfect. The perfect story that will go far and wide. The realization of me. All will either fear or respect me. Now the crowd breaks. Voices are raised, and then a cheer takes a throat or two of those watching. They realize I am their wolf, their kin. The crowd becomes alive, with voices shouting my name as the people stand tall. I have them. They are now mine. They have pride in me. As the volume of the crowd decreases, I reach for the blade above the sacrifice's head. It feels so puny in my grasp, and I cast it to one side, dismissing it as useless. I turn from the crowd, offering my open palms to the still-standing priest with a jug of sanctifying ale. At first he looks at me questioningly, and then he understands my request, stepping forward and nodding at me. I again lift my clawed paws to him, and he pours the liquid over them. I rinse my killing tools to clean them for their work. Once the jug is spent, I turn back to the head of the table and reach forward to the girl's chest. I drive my claws deep into it. She screams in response, trying to sit up against the push of my weight, and she is strong, and the blood pours from her as she looks to the sky. The scream stops, and she shakes for a moment. Her eyes are glazed and no longer looking on this world. A tiny smile crosses her blood-red lips, and only I hear the words she utters in her utter bliss. I see him. Odin welcomes me, before she is gone. Once she's dead, I crack open her ribcage at the sternum, separating those ribs like the wings of a bloody hawk. The spirit of her has gone to the halls of heaven. Odin has taken her for one of his own. Her body is now just an empty flesh vessel. I remove the seat of her being, the heart, and raise it to the cheering crowd as its final pulses leak the fluid of her life. Her blood, it runs onto my arms and onto my hands. Troll fight. The gigantic creature then looked at the 5 men backing off from it and yelling their own disdain at it. It looked down at its injured calf and looked confused, but on shaking the remnants of leaf from its palm, it reached for the wound, placing its finger in the gouged hole. The yell that came was one of the most bestial sounds I've ever heard, a mix of anger and pain. We'd injured it, yes. The injury was horrendous. You could see bone and the flesh was visible. How could the creature still walk? The monster stamped the injured foot back on the ground and tested for its suitability to support his own weight. It was ignoring us. Once it seemed comfortable, it noticed us again and momentarily took its weight on the bad leg just to see if it was functional. Everything seemed to be okay. So the troll resumed his work, bringing the bloody hand to his mouth and licking it clean with relish before reaching for the tree's root ball, getting the tree horizontally to its mouth and biting the root from the trunk. We could do nothing but just watch this. It wasn't fear, it was the realization of what we thought. We had underestimated the old troll. We thought it'd be easy meat for warriors of our ability, but, well, that wasn't the case. This was more than, well, a worthy battle. It would be an excellent way to die if we fell. After it bit the root ball from the trunk, he slung the massive clod of mud and stone at Niall and Scar, who managed somehow to dive away from the explosive impact of the lump. They were momentarily lost in a haze of powdered dust from the explosive landing. Surprisingly, the troll had suddenly moved to their position. Only its head was visible above the cloud dust. I saw it raise itself bodily twice as large booms were heard on each drop of what I imagined was a stamping foot. I assumed it was the creature stamping down. I could see nothing of the men as they were hidden in the dust. I heard no noise of them, no cries of men, which I took to be a good sign. The birch tree the monster held with its gigantic leafy crown was lifted well above the creature's head. The tree hid the giant's face for a moment with leaves and branches. The trunk's now rootless end was slammed down, and the leaves and branches fell and cracked as the impact loosened them. This time, there was a definite foreshortened scream, and then another, and then silence. Shit. I think they were down. I think the men were down. It was not going to be a straightforward victory. I had no idea. The day before. It had been the end of the festival. I'd revealed the wolf in me to all those present, and they had seen me for what I was, Ulvenzeer. I'd been given the respect and the admiration that had been due, but as all of us Norse know, that is not what this life is all about. I loved to be challenged, and a challenge was laid at my feet, and I felt that I could not refuse it. Arganastyle, a mighty troll, had been making life difficult for a newly built village north of Uppsala. The headman of the village was not under my jarlship, but that was not important in this case. What was important in this case was that the monster that harassed them would add to my story when I fought it. It would add to my fame. In destroying one of these great beasts, my reputation as a mighty fighter would be sealed. Skelita was a small town born only recently based on the fishing available there. Salmon and trout ran in considerable quantities in the river Skelleftehaven seasonally. People had been attracted to the site, and as the population of man had moved northwards in the last few summers, they had come into conflict with the animals, creatures, and spirits that had made their home there. The brown bears, wolves, and, rare polar bear could be hunted and destroyed by man. Usually the trolls would move from an area that man pushed into. They were not known for their antagonistic response to humans and would often, even when huge, leave the area the humans moved into. They preferred to avoid being around the sights and the smells of man, and it was not as though that land itself was a rare or unavailable commodity this far north. Argonostyle, the troll, he wasn't ready or willing to leave these rich grounds and was prepared to protect his fishing sites. He lived next to a narrow point on the river, allowing him to pull the fish from the water with his hands. He did not want to leave his home, and unlike most trolls, he was willing to protect it. Many men had died, and as the local population had tried to fight him, they were killed in their droves. The people of the village knew that if he wished, he could come to them and easily destroy them. You ask, what is a troll? Oh, I forgot that the modern mind does not know what these beasts are, as they are now in such few numbers and hidden by such secrecy that the majority of the human population do not know that they exist. Wait a moment, let me check the Professor's Beast Diary. They are earthly fey giants and were seen as an enemy of the Norse gods. As the enemy of the gods, they were captured and expelled to Midgard. They had taken this well, actually, and had, made this world their home. They loved its natural beauty. They are classed as giants, but can vary from the size of a small boulder to being, mountainous. The largest at rest can be thought to be a mountain. They are often as wide as they are tall and seem to be a strange mixture of rock and organic material. No one knows. Once they die, they become stone. Magic has allowed them to exist. Magic from another world that can defy certain laws we hold true from physics. To us, they are grotesque in form. They have no grooming or clothing and are proud to be covered in moss, ivy and plants of all kind. Even the largest seem to fade into the background when still. They are humanoid, but may have more limbs and heads, commonly. To men they are intimidating and seem to represent the natural world in their makeup. They've been classified simply as cave, forest and river trolls, but they vary massively, and this labelling is a loose manner of cataloguing them. The larger trolls are often solitary, but the smaller creatures seem to like the company of others of their kin. The isolated nature of the true giant trolls has been thought to be down to the massive amounts of food it takes to support one of these behemoths. If food is in short supply, they will hibernate until nature provides a greater abundance. In some cases, it is thought that this can be periods of thousands of years. The rumours that they turn to stone in the sunlight are wrong. They are nocturnal and are at rest when found during the day. Often, they are so deeply asleep that they are unlikely to wake, even with the highest levels of provocation. Argonostyle was an outlier. He had moved on much in his time, and at this point, he did not want to move on again from his home and the plenty it offered him. It had not been difficult to find. He was fishing at the site we had been told he used. The river ran rich with fish, and the troll only had to sweep his hand gently through the river to fill his palm with the large flapping creatures. It was incredible to watch the troll at work. He stood over the water. His gigantic shadow was a sight beneath which the fish gathered, thinking it was safe cover from the sky. He would slowly trail his hands through the water at such a pace that the fish were not disturbed by the speed at which they moved. The fish gathered in the pool of his combined palms, which he then allowed to run dry by offering the water to run through the gaps between those gigantic fingers. The sight of the giant fishing was actually quite wholesome to watch, as you could sense his excitement at receiving his catch. Arganastyle, being magical, noticed Fenrir, my wolf soul, on the bank watching him as he worked. I expected something brutal and guttural to explode from the troll as he prepared to fight the giant wolf. The result kind of actually shook me. The monster slowly turned to face the wolf with hands full of fish and then, without threats, walked towards Fen on the riverside. We all know that he couldn't harm Fen, being ethereal and spiritual, so Fenrir was untouchable. It was not as though the troll could kill or even hurt him. I mean, I kind of expected that the troll was playing possum, pretending to be friendly to do some doggy stomping as a surprise, but no. He wandered up to the wolf and simply stood before him for a while. I was stressed, but Fenrir reassured me as he was interested that what would happen. Fenrir just held his ground, looking at the behemoth approaching him. He did have to keep comforting me a little more so that I could just accept his actions, but I knew, he knew, that he knew, that I knew, that he knew that it would be all right. Wow, that was a sentence and a half. I mean, it seemed that if Fen had been a dog and not a big fuck-off wolf, that he would have probably actually wagged his fucking tail or something at Arganastyle's approach. The troll stopped in front of the soul at a respectful distance, and I think it smiled. It wasn't easy to tell with that face. It stood for a while like the young boy at the dance trying to talk to the popular girl he knew was way out of his league. But he's young and stupid, so he tries to talk to her anyway. Eventually, the big fucker just shrugged at the wolf before him and emptied his hands of fish, taking a step back once the flapping fish was presented, and using his hands and gigantic grunts, he offered them to Fenrir. What the fuck was going on? Trolls are supposed to be mad killing machines. Well, that's what I'd been told. This one was offering food to the wolf. Weird. Halfdan and Nud had moved onto the opposite bank. We'd planned to flush the giant from the water and onto, well, our spears. As I watched, he seemed a very gentle soul, and he just returned to the water and hummed and murmured as he fished in the waters. He strained them from the clear liquid and carefully placed them on the bank to, again, resume his watch over his little fishing eddy. An overwhelming feeling that I didn't really want to harm this creature came over me. Can trolls talk? I know in the sagas that they spoke to the gods. I wanted to speak to him, to understand him. This was not how these things were supposed to behave. We had been told that they hated all living creatures and would kill for pleasure, that they destroyed for fun, and that they were, well, just utter nasty bastards. This big guy just seemed to be having fun fishing as though it was, I don't know, a kind of hobby of his. And then, for fuck's sake, Ulrich threw the spear. Oh no, yeah, that was right. He threw a spear at the big fuck-off fisherman and started to yell at it. The spear flew true and buried itself deep into the muscle of Arganastyle's shoulder. It shrieked in horror at the attack, suddenly looking up at the men on the far bank with shock and fear. The poor thing just looked fucking frightened at the thing sticking out of it. My heart felt a pang of guilt. I'd set this up and it was my fault that the big boar spear was now sticking out of him. The two men were jumping up and down and rattling swords and spears on shields and making a horrendous racket to try and drive the troll from the river. The troll just stared at them in confusion, and then, very carefully and with great dexterity, removed the spear from its shoulder. He rinsed the wound in the water as the men danced and shouted. He didn't seem too concerned about them, but I was, because if the giant did not react the right way, they would up the ante and get more violent. I ran forward at this point, waving and shouting, not at the troll, at the men. No, please, please, no! I tried to stop them from throwing more spears and stones, but it was too late. The troll saw me close in on him and grimaced in pain. Hate flashed across its face. I was an enemy. Now the thing fucking charged, and I ran for my life. The plan had been to draw him into the trees where we would take him down, as we would find cover in those trees and underbrush. That had been the plan, but we will get to that. Excuse me while I run like a fucking fuck and get away. Fucking people. Fucking trolls. Thank you for listening to Werewolf the podcast, the Viking stories. Remember, you can start the Viking series from episode 101 if you want to catch up on Thorstein and Fenrir as they slowly take over the Viking world. Please remember to share, like, review, just do really nice things, because we try and work really hard on this, and it's all because of you, because of the feedback we get. So we love you all. Remember that. We love you. Bye.